The first time someone walks past the towering shell of the old Baker Hotel in Mineral Wells, Texas, they usually stop without meaning to. Even today, long after its grand opening days have faded into history, the building still seems to watch the quiet streets around it. Its windows rise floor after floor like dark, silent eyes staring into the distance. And people who live in Mineral Wells will often tell you the same thing in a low voice, almost like they're sharing a secret they're not entirely comfortable repeating. The Baker Hotel was once the most glamorous destination in Texas, but somewhere in its long history, something changed. Something that turned one of the most luxurious hotels in America into a place surrounded by whispers, strange stories, and unanswered questions. Because the Baker Hotel wasn't just famous for wealth and celebrities, it slowly became known for something else entirely. Something people still talk about nearly a century later. To understand why this building holds such a strange reputation, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a time when Mineral Wells was booming with energy, hope, and an almost magical belief in something hidden beneath the ground. In the early 1900s, Mineral Wells wasn't just another Texas town. It was a place people traveled hundreds of miles to reach. The reason was water, but not just ordinary water. Beneath the soil of this small Texas town were mineral springs that many believed had incredible healing powers. People suffering from arthritis, chronic illness, and mysterious conditions arrived from all over the country, hoping the water would restore their health. And in many cases, people believed it did. Stories spread quickly. Travelers returned home claiming they felt stronger. Pain disappeared. Doctors began recommending visits. Soon, Mineral Wells became known as one of the most famous health resorts in the United States. Hotels sprang up to accommodate the endless flow of visitors. Small inns, boarding houses, resorts built around the mineral wells themselves. But none of them could compare to what two ambitious men were planning to build. In 1926, entrepreneurs Theodore Baker and Earl R. Barber envisioned something that would transform mineral wells forever. They weren't thinking small. They wanted to build the most luxurious resort hotel in Texas. The result was the Baker Hotel. When construction finished in 1929, the building stood 14 stories tall, towering over the town like a palace. With nearly 450 rooms, a grand ballroom, lavish dining halls, and elegant suites, the Baker Hotel quickly became a symbol of wealth and luxury. Guests arrived by train, stepping into a world of polished marble floors, shining chandeliers, and elegant music drifting through enormous halls. Hollywood actors visited. Politicians stayed there. Wealthy businessmen spent weeks enjoying the famous mineral baths located in the hotel's basement spa. It was the kind of place where fortunes were discussed over dinner and champagne flowed freely. For years, the Baker Hotel represented success, beauty, and excitement. But even during those early years, some guests began reporting strange things. Small things at first, nothing dramatic, just unusual moments that made people pause. A woman staying on the 7th floor once claimed she heard footsteps pacing outside her room all night long. When she finally opened the door at dawn, the hallway was completely empty. Another guest reported hearing someone knocking gently on his door several times during the night. Each time he opened it, no one was there. Staff assumed it was simply the old building settling or guests imagining things. After all, the hotel was enormous. With hundreds of rooms and endless hallways, sounds traveled in unpredictable ways. But the stories didn't stop. If anything, they grew stranger. One of the earliest rumors involved a woman who stayed at the hotel during the 1930s. According to several accounts passed down through former employees, the woman had arrived alone and checked into one of the higher floors. She rarely left her room except to walk the halls late at night. Some staff members remembered her as quiet but polite. Others described her as nervous, often glancing over her shoulder as if someone were following her. One evening, she reportedly jumped from one of the upper windows. The story quickly spread through the hotel staff. But strangely, records of the event are almost impossible to find. Some historians believe the incident was quietly covered up to protect the hotel's reputation. Others believe the story grew from rumors and misunderstandings over time. Either way, many people believe that the woman's presence never truly left the building. Decades later, guests staying in certain rooms would claim to hear faint crying late at night. Others described the sensation of someone standing near their bed, even when the room appeared empty. Whether these experiences were imagination, coincidence, or something else entirely is impossible to say. But they became part of the hotel's growing legend, and the Baker Hotel's history was only beginning. As the years passed, the hotel remained one of the most important landmarks in Texas. During the 1930s and 1940s, it hosted countless visitors drawn to the healing mineral waters of mineral wells. One of the most famous guests was none other than Clark Gable, the legendary Hollywood actor known for his role in Gone with the Wind. Gable stayed at the Baker Hotel during the height of his fame, enjoying the luxury and privacy it offered. Other celebrities followed. Musicians, athletes, and politicians all visited the hotel at various times. But behind the elegance and glamour, the building quietly gathered stories. Some employees who worked late shifts reported hearing elevator bells ring on floors where no one had called them. Others claimed that lights occasionally turned on in empty rooms. One night clerk described hearing distant music drifting from the ballroom long after the evening events had ended. When he walked into the room, the music stopped instantly. The ballroom was empty. Stories like this spread quietly among staff members, but they rarely reached the public. After all, the Baker Hotel depended on its reputation. Guests came seeking luxury and healing. No one wanted to stay in a place rumored to be haunted, so the story stayed mostly behind closed doors. For a while, the building continued thriving. But time has a way of changing everything. By the 1950s, mineral wells began losing its popularity as a health destination. Advances in modern medicine meant fewer people believed in the healing power of mineral waters. Travel patterns changed. Air travel replaced trains. Large resorts in other states began attracting wealthy travelers. Slowly, the crowds visiting mineral wells began shrinking. The Baker Hotel, once full of life and energy, started feeling quieter. Rooms that had once been booked months in advance now sat empty for weeks. Hallways that once echoed with laughter and conversation became strangely silent. And when large buildings grow quiet, small sounds suddenly become much easier to notice. Employees working night shifts reported hearing doors close on empty floors. Housekeepers occasionally found furniture moved in rooms that had not been occupied. Some swore they saw figures walking down distant hallways only to disappear when approached. One maintenance worker later described an experience that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Late one night, while checking plumbing systems in the basement spa area, he heard someone walking slowly across the tiled floor behind him. He assumed another worker had come downstairs, but when he turned around, the room was empty. The footsteps continued for several seconds, then stopped. The man finished his shift as quickly as possible and reportedly refused to work in the basement again. These stories might have remained nothing more than strange rumors if the hotel had continued operating normally. But the Baker Hotel's final years were approaching. By the early 1960s, the building was struggling financially. Visitors had declined dramatically. Maintenance costs were enormous, and the once grand hotel could no longer support itself. In 1963, after more than 30 years of operation, the Baker Hotel closed its doors. The grand lobby fell silent, furniture was removed, lights were turned off. The enormous building stood empty, but the strange stories surrounding it didn't disappear. In fact, they grew stronger. Over the following decades, the abandoned Baker Hotel became one of the most talked-about haunted locations in Texas. Teenagers sneaking inside late at night reported hearing unexplained voices echoing through the halls. Urban explorers described seeing shadows moving in distant rooms. Some claim they felt sudden drops in temperature when entering certain floors. One of the most commonly reported experiences involved the elevator. Even though the power had long been shut off, several visitors claimed the old elevator doors sometimes appeared slightly open. Others swore they heard the faint ding of the elevator bell deep inside the building. Of course, abandoned buildings often produce strange sounds. Wind moves through broken windows. Old pipes shift inside the walls. But some people believed the Baker Hotel had become something else entirely, a place where the past never fully disappeared. Over time, investigators interested in paranormal research began visiting the property. They brought cameras, recording devices, and temperature sensors. Many of them reported unusual findings. Some captured unexplained sounds during nighttime recordings. Others claimed electronic devices malfunctioned unexpectedly inside certain rooms. Still, none of these experiences provided clear proof of anything supernatural. What they did provide was something almost as powerful: more stories, more questions, more mystery. And perhaps the strangest part of the Baker Hotel story is that, even today, nearly a century after it first opened, people continue debating what truly happened within those towering walls. Was it simply an aging building filled with echoes and imagination? Or did decades of human emotion, joy, illness, hope, disappointment, and tragedy leave something behind? Because places like the Baker Hotel aren't just structures made of brick and steel. They are containers of memories. Thousands of people passed through those doors over the years. Some arrived filled with hope that the mineral waters would heal them. Others celebrated weddings, anniversaries, and milestones inside its grand ballroom. And some may have carried burdens far heavier than anyone around them realized. When buildings hold that much history, strange stories often follow. Today, the Baker Hotel is slowly being restored, with plans to bring it back to life once again. Construction crews have returned. Lights occasionally glow in windows that were dark for decades. Soon, guests may once again walk through the same halls where visitors once laughed, danced, and shared their lives. And perhaps new stories will be written within those walls. But one question still lingers quietly among the people who know the Baker Hotel best. When the doors finally reopen and guests return, will the past remain silent? Or will the whispers of everything that happened inside those halls still be waiting in the shadows, listening, just as they always have? The truth is that stories about a place like the Baker Hotel rarely begin with something dramatic. They begin quietly, almost invisibly, with moments so small that no one thinks much about them at first. A sound in an empty hallway, a light that turns on without explanation, a voice that someone swears they heard even though no one else was there. For years during the Baker Hotel's golden era, employees worked long hours keeping the enormous building running smoothly. Hundreds of guests filled its rooms during busy seasons, and every day the staff followed the same rhythm: cleaning rooms, delivering food, checking electrical systems, guiding visitors through the spa and mineral baths that had made mineral wells famous. But the size of the building meant that not every hallway was busy all the time. There were corners where quiet settled heavily, especially late at night when the last guests had returned to their rooms. One housekeeper who worked there during the late 1930s would later describe a moment that unsettled her deeply. She had been cleaning one of the upper floors in the early morning, before guests began leaving their rooms. As she moved her cart down the hallway, she heard a door close softly behind her. She turned around expecting to see someone stepping into the corridor, but the hallway was empty. At first she assumed a guest must have closed their door and walked away quickly. Yet when she checked the rooms nearby, several were completely vacant. The front desk records showed no one had checked into them. The woman finished her shift that morning but reportedly refused to clean that hallway alone again. Stories like that were never officially documented, but they circulated quietly among employees who worked in the building year after year. Some dismissed them as simple misunderstandings. Others began noticing patterns. The Baker Hotel was full of long corridors and staircases, and sounds often echoed in strange ways. Yet certain floors seemed to produce experiences more frequently than others. Guests on the seventh floor occasionally complained about hearing someone walking in the hallway during the night, even though no one appeared on the floor when staff checked. Some reported hearing a door gently knocking 3 times, always the same slow rhythm. When they opened the door, no one was there. The reports were never dramatic enough to frighten visitors away. Most guests assumed the building simply had thin walls or creaky floors. But the staff began whispering about a particular story that resurfaced again and again. The woman who had fallen from one of the upper windows years earlier. No one could agree on the exact details. Some believed she had been a guest suffering from illness who had grown overwhelmed during her stay. Others said she had been heartbroken over a relationship that ended during her visit. What remained consistent in every version was the location, the seventh floor. Decades later, when people began investigating the hotel's history more closely, they discovered something interesting. During the 1930s and 1940s, several guests had checked out unexpectedly after staying in rooms on that same floor. Their complaints were vague: strange noises, uneasy feelings, difficulty sleeping. None of the reports proved anything supernatural, of course, but the stories kept growing. One of the most frequently repeated accounts came from a bellhop who worked at the hotel during the early 1940s. His job often required him to ride the elevator late at night delivering luggage or messages to guests. According to the story he shared years later, something unusual happened during one of his overnight shifts. He had been waiting near the elevator when the call bell rang from the 8th floor. That wasn't unusual. Guests often requested assistance late in the evening. He stepped inside the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors opened on the 8th floor, the hallway was completely empty. He assumed the guest who had called the elevator must have changed their mind and returned to their room. But as the elevator doors began closing, he heard something behind him. Footsteps. Slow, measured steps walking toward the elevator. He held the door open, expecting someone to appear, but no one came. The footsteps stopped just outside the elevator. The bellhop reportedly stood there for nearly a minute waiting for someone to enter. Eventually, he closed the doors and returned to the lobby. He never discovered who had called the elevator. Experiences like this might have remained nothing more than curious stories if the Baker Hotel had continued operating normally. But the building's later years created an entirely new chapter in its strange reputation. When the hotel finally closed in 1963, the enormous structure stood silent for the first time in decades. Without guests or staff filling the hallways, the quiet became almost overwhelming. Local residents who lived nearby began noticing strange things about the empty building. Lights occasionally appeared in windows even though the electricity had been shut off. At night, some claimed they could hear faint sounds drifting from the upper floors. Music, footsteps, doors closing. Teenagers from Mineral Wells eventually began daring each other to enter the abandoned hotel after dark. Urban exploration wasn't a common hobby at the time, but curiosity about the building was impossible to resist. Some who entered the Baker Hotel described the experience as deeply unsettling. Dust covered the floors. Furniture had been removed. Wind pushed softly through broken windows. But several visitors described something else: the sensation that they were not alone. One group that explored the hotel during the late 1970s later described hearing footsteps echoing down a distant hallway while they were on the 5th floor. At first, they assumed another group of explorers had entered the building. But after searching several floors, they found no one else inside. Another visitor reported hearing faint piano music drifting through the building, even though the ballroom had been empty for years. The sound reportedly faded as soon as he approached the room. Over time, these stories spread far beyond Mineral Wells. By the 1990s, paranormal investigators had begun traveling to Texas specifically to explore the abandoned Baker Hotel. They brought cameras and audio equipment hoping to document unusual activity. Some claimed they captured unexplained sounds during overnight recordings. Others reported electronic devices behaving strangely inside certain rooms. Again, none of these findings offered definitive proof of anything supernatural, but they strengthened the building's reputation. The Baker Hotel became widely known as one of the most haunted locations in Texas. What made the mystery even more compelling was the hotel's long history. Thousands of people had passed through its doors over 3 decades of operation. Guests arrived carrying hopes, fears, illnesses, and personal struggles. Some found healing in the mineral waters. Others may have left with their lives forever changed. And buildings with that much emotional history often develop stories that refuse to disappear. Even today, the town of Mineral Wells continues discussing the strange reputation of the Baker Hotel. Some residents believe the stories are exaggerated legends passed down over generations. Others insist that too many people have experienced unusual things inside the building for all of them to be coincidence. Perhaps the most fascinating development in recent years is the effort to restore the historic structure. After decades of standing empty, major renovation projects began with the goal of reopening the Baker Hotel once again. Construction crews entered the building to repair damaged walls, restore rooms, and bring electricity back to the enormous structure. Several workers reportedly described unusual moments while working inside, tools disappearing and reappearing in different locations, sounds echoing from empty floors late at night. Occasionally, the sense that someone had just walked past them in a hallway even though no one was nearby. Most dismissed these experiences as the natural result of working inside a massive old building filled with echoes and shadows. But others quietly admitted that certain areas of the hotel felt different, heavier somehow, as if the building remembered everything that had happened inside it. And perhaps that idea explains why the story of the Baker Hotel continues capturing people's imagination nearly a century after it first opened. Because places like this are more than just architecture. They are collections of human stories layered over decades, joyful celebrations, quiet struggles, moments of hope and moments of despair. When thousands of lives intersect in the same building year after year, the echoes of those experiences sometimes linger long after the people themselves have gone. Soon, when the restoration is finally complete, guests may once again walk through the grand lobby of the Baker Hotel. They will see polished floors, bright chandeliers, and elegant rooms restored to their former beauty. To most visitors, it will simply feel like stepping into a piece of history. But late at night, when the hallways grow quiet and the last elevator doors close for the evening, some guests may begin noticing the same small things people once reported decades ago. A faint sound in an empty corridor, a door gently tapping 3 times, footsteps that stop just before reaching the room. And in those quiet moments, they might find themselves wondering the same question that has surrounded the Baker Hotel for nearly 100 years. Whether the building truly became haunted, or whether the past simply never left. The strange reputation of the old Baker Hotel did not truly begin when the building closed. In many ways, it had been quietly forming for years while the hotel was still alive with music, laughter, and visitors arriving from all across the country. The difference was that during those early decades, the building was so full of activity that unusual events were easy to dismiss. When a place contains hundreds of guests, dozens of employees, and constant movement day and night, almost any strange moment can be explained away as coincidence. But even during the height of its luxury era in the 1930s and early 1940s, certain stories quietly circulated among the hotel staff. One of the most frequently repeated stories involved the spa area deep beneath the hotel. The Baker Hotel had become famous partly because of the mineral waters flowing under mineral wells. Guests traveled great distances to soak in those baths, believing the water could ease pain and restore health. The spa itself was an impressive underground facility with tiled rooms, steam chambers, and large bathing pools. During the day, it was lively and full of guests seeking treatment. At night, however, the underground corridors became almost completely silent. Maintenance workers who serviced the plumbing and water systems sometimes worked long hours in those quiet spaces after the spa had closed for the evening. A few of them later described moments that they struggled to explain. One plumber who worked there during the late 1940s once described hearing voices echoing faintly through the tiled hallways while he was repairing a pipe. At first, he assumed a group of guests had entered the spa after hours, but when he walked through the entire underground level, he found every room empty. The voices stopped the moment he entered the hallway where they seemed to be coming from. He later insisted the sound resembled quiet conversation, as if several people were speaking softly together. No one ever discovered who, or what, he might have heard. Another incident involved a night security guard who regularly patrolled the hotel's lower floors. According to a story he told years later, one of his duties was to check the ballroom and surrounding areas after events ended to make sure everything had been locked properly. One evening after a large gathering had finished, he returned to the ballroom to ensure the lights were off. As he walked toward the doors, he heard music drifting faintly through the hallway. The ballroom orchestra had packed up hours earlier, yet the sound inside the room was unmistakable. Soft piano notes echoing gently through the enormous chamber. He opened the doors expecting to find someone inside. The room was empty. The piano sat quietly on the stage. The music stopped the moment the doors opened. Stories like this might have faded away if the hotel had remained active for decades longer. But the building's closure in 1963 created the perfect conditions for those quiet rumors to grow into something far more mysterious. Once the hotel stood abandoned, it began attracting curious visitors who wanted to explore the empty structure. The Baker Hotel had once been the pride of Mineral Wells. Now it had become a silent monument towering above the town. Broken windows, rusted fixtures, and layers of dust slowly covered what had once been one of the most luxurious destinations in Texas. Yet something about the building continued drawing people toward it. Teenagers began sneaking inside at night just to prove they were brave enough. Some returned telling stories that sounded like ordinary adventures in an old building. Others described experiences that unsettled them deeply. One group that entered the hotel during the early 1980s later described hearing a loud bang echo through the hallway above them. When they climbed the staircase to investigate, they discovered a heavy door swinging slowly back and forth. What made the moment strange was that the door opened into a sealed room with no broken windows. There was no wind inside the hallway. Another visitor reported seeing what looked like a figure standing near the far end of a corridor. Assuming it was another explorer, he called out to them. The figure didn't move. When he approached closer, it disappeared behind a corner. But when he reached the end of the hallway, there was nowhere the person could have gone. No stairs. No open doors. Just a blank wall. By the 1990s, the Baker Hotel had gained national attention among paranormal investigators. Many considered it one of the most intriguing haunted locations in the southern United States. Investigators began visiting the site with recording equipment, hoping to capture evidence of unexplained activity. Some claimed to record faint sounds, resembling footsteps moving across empty rooms. Others reported electronic devices malfunctioning inside certain areas of the building. One investigator described an experience during a nighttime exploration when his audio recorder captured what sounded like a quiet whisper. The voice was impossible to understand clearly, but he insisted the recording contained a single phrase spoken softly. "Don't leave." Skeptics argue that sounds recorded in old buildings can easily be explained by environmental noise, shifting structures, or distant traffic echoing through empty spaces. And they may be correct, but the stories surrounding the Baker Hotel continued growing year after year. Then something unexpected happened. After decades of abandonment, serious plans emerged to restore the historic building. Investors recognized the architectural importance of the Baker Hotel and began discussing ways to bring the structure back to life. The project was enormous. Years of decay had left the building in poor condition. Walls needed rebuilding. Plumbing and electrical systems had to be completely replaced. Floors had to be reinforced. Construction crews eventually began entering the building to start the restoration process. Some of those workers quietly shared their own unusual experiences. One electrician working on the 8th floor reported hearing what sounded like someone walking slowly across the floor above him late one evening. At first, he assumed another crew member was still working upstairs. But when he checked the schedule, he discovered he was the only person inside the building that night. Another worker described hearing a door close somewhere behind him while he was carrying equipment down a hallway. When he turned around, the corridor remained empty. Even those who dismissed the hotel's haunted reputation admitted the building had an atmosphere that was difficult to ignore. 14 floors of silent rooms create a powerful sense of isolation, and places with long histories often feel different than newer structures. Perhaps the most interesting part of the Baker Hotel story is that no single event explains its reputation. Unlike some haunted locations that revolve around one famous tragedy, the Baker Hotel's mystery comes from decades of smaller stories layered together. A woman rumored to have fallen from an upper floor, guests hearing footsteps in empty hallways, music drifting from silent ballrooms, voices echoing through underground spa corridors, explorers seeing shadows moving in distant rooms, workers sensing someone nearby when no one was present. Individually, any one of these stories might be dismissed as imagination, but together they create something more powerful, a legend. Today, as restoration efforts slowly continue, many people are eager to see the Baker Hotel return to its former glory. When the doors eventually reopen, guests will once again walk through the grand entrance, ride the elevators, and sleep in rooms that have been silent for decades. Most visitors will simply enjoy the beauty of the restored hotel and its long history. But some may find themselves listening more carefully once the lights dim and the hallways grow quiet. Because buildings remember, not in the way people do, but in the way stories linger within walls. Every laugh, every whispered conversation, every moment of fear or joy that occurred inside the Baker Hotel has become part of its identity. And when a place holds that many human experiences across nearly a century, the line between history and legend sometimes becomes difficult to see clearly. So perhaps the real mystery of the Baker Hotel is not whether it is haunted. Perhaps the real mystery is why so many people, across so many different decades, have walked through those halls and felt the same strange sensation. The feeling that somewhere inside the towering walls of that old Texas hotel, the past might still be quietly waiting, not threatening, not visible, but present, watching, and listening, just as it always has. There is something about abandoned places that changes the way people behave inside them. Voices become quieter without anyone asking for silence. Footsteps slow down. People begin noticing details they would normally ignore. And inside the towering halls of the Baker Hotel, that quiet awareness seemed to grow stronger the longer someone remained there. During the decades after the hotel closed, the building stood like a sleeping giant over the small town of Mineral Wells. Wind moved through broken windows, rain occasionally slipped through cracks in the roof, and dust slowly settled over every abandoned room. Yet even in that long silence, the structure never truly felt empty to those who entered it. One of the more unusual accounts came from a local historian who had been documenting the town's past. In the early 1990s, he was granted temporary access to photograph parts of the building for a preservation project. Unlike teenagers sneaking inside at night or thrill seekers hoping for a ghost story, he approached the place with a calm curiosity. To him, the hotel was a piece of Texas history. He spent hours walking through corridors that once held laughter, music, and conversation. The lobby still carried traces of its former elegance. Even in its worn state, you could imagine the polished floors and shining chandeliers that once greeted wealthy visitors arriving by train. But the deeper he explored the building, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. On the upper floors, the air felt heavier, almost as if the rooms had been holding their breath for decades. While photographing a hallway near what had once been a popular guest suite area, he heard something behind him. A door closing. Not a loud slam, just the soft click of a latch settling into place. He turned around immediately. The corridor behind him was empty. What made the moment unsettling was that every door on that floor had been left slightly open for ventilation during renovation assessments. None of them should have closed by themselves. Yet one door at the far end of the hallway now stood completely shut. The historian walked toward it slowly, expecting to find a gust of wind pushing through the broken windows. But when he opened the door, the room inside was completely still. No wind, no movement, just an empty space covered in dust. He later admitted that the moment stayed with him longer than he expected, not because he believed anything supernatural had happened, but because he could not find any logical explanation for the sound he heard. Moments like that slowly added to the building's reputation. Over time, even people who did not believe in hauntings began acknowledging that the Baker Hotel had a strange atmosphere. Another story often repeated by local residents involves a group of explorers who entered the building during the early 2000s. They were experienced urban photographers interested in documenting abandoned architecture. Unlike thrill seekers, they approached the hotel carefully and respectfully. Late one evening, while photographing the staircase leading toward the upper floors, one member of the group reported hearing footsteps coming down from above. At first, they assumed another photographer had moved ahead of them, but when the sound continued, it became clear the steps were descending slowly toward them, one step at a time. They called out several times, expecting someone to respond. No answer came. Then the footsteps stopped. The group climbed the staircase to investigate. The upper floor was empty. There were no open doors nearby, no places where someone could have hidden quickly. And yet all of them agreed they had heard the same thing. Footsteps moving down the stairs. Stories like this are fascinating because they exist in a strange space between certainty and doubt. Every person involved believes what they experienced, but experiences alone cannot prove anything. Old buildings are complicated environments. Sound echoes, structures shift, wind travels through hidden openings. Still, the number of similar reports connected to the Baker Hotel over many decades continues to raise curiosity. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of the building's story involves the renovation workers who began returning in recent years as part of restoration efforts. Unlike explorers or investigators hoping for unusual experiences, these workers entered the hotel with a simple purpose: rebuilding it. They brought tools, machinery, and bright work lights that slowly pushed back the darkness that had filled the building for decades. Yet even among practical construction crews, a few strange moments occurred. One worker described hearing what sounded like someone tapping lightly on a wall while he was installing electrical wiring. Assuming another crew member was trying to get his attention from the other side, he called out several times. No one answered. Later, he discovered there were no workers in the rooms adjacent to the wall where the tapping had occurred. Another crew member working on the 9th floor reported hearing music faintly echoing through the hallway during a late shift. At first, he assumed someone nearby had turned on a radio. But as he walked through the corridor searching for the source, the sound faded away. No radio was found. No other workers were present. Even those who laughed about the hotel's haunted reputation admitted the building had moments that felt difficult to explain. Perhaps that feeling is simply the result of standing inside a structure filled with history. The Baker Hotel opened in 1929, just months before the Great Depression began. It survived economic hardship, changing travel habits, and decades of shifting American culture before finally closing in 1963. During those 34 years, thousands upon thousands of people passed through its doors. Guests came seeking healing from the mineral waters of mineral wells. Families celebrated weddings in the grand ballroom. Musicians performed for crowds that filled the dining halls with laughter and music. Employees spent years working inside the building, learning every hallway and staircase by heart. Every one of those lives left a small mark on the place. And perhaps that is what people sense when they walk through its silent corridors today. Not ghosts, not spirits, but the weight of memory. Old hotels are unique because they collect human stories more densely than almost any other type of building. Each room becomes part of someone's life for a brief moment. Some moments joyful, others quiet or difficult. When those moments accumulate over decades, the building becomes more than architecture. It becomes a kind of archive. The Baker Hotel holds thousands of such moments, some recorded in photographs and newspapers, others remembered only through stories passed quietly from one generation to the next. As restoration work continues, many people are excited to see the hotel return to its original beauty. Soon, visitors may once again check into rooms overlooking the quiet streets of Mineral Wells. The ballroom may fill with music again. The elevators may carry guests up and down the 14 floors just as they did nearly a century ago. Most visitors will simply enjoy the history and elegance of the restored building. But a few may notice something else when night settles over the hotel. Perhaps a faint sound in the hallway outside their door. Perhaps the soft echo of footsteps somewhere far away. Or perhaps nothing at all. Because the mystery of the Baker Hotel has never depended on proving whether something supernatural exists within its walls. The real mystery is the feeling that so many different people have described over the years. A quiet sense that the building remembers everything that has happened inside it. And when the lights dim and the halls grow silent, that memory feels almost alive. Not frightening, not threatening, just present. As if the past is still moving slowly through those corridors, long after the voices and footsteps that created it have faded away. And perhaps that is why the story of the Baker Hotel continues to fascinate people nearly a century after its doors first opened. Because some places do more than hold history. Some places seem to hold on to it. Even after so many stories had already circulated about the towering halls of the Baker Hotel. The most unsettling aspect of the building was not any single report or unexplained sound. What truly disturbed people was how consistently different visitors described the same quiet sensations without knowing about each other's experiences. The building seemed to produce a certain kind of silence, not the ordinary silence of an empty place, but a deeper quiet that made every small sound feel amplified. A dropped tool would echo for several seconds. A distant creak could travel down a hallway like a whispered conversation. Some visitors said that after spending enough time inside the hotel, they began feeling as though the building itself was listening. One restoration supervisor who worked on early structural assessments once described a moment that stayed with him long after he left the site. He had been walking through the upper floors late in the evening, checking areas scheduled for repair the following week. His flashlight moved slowly across the peeling wallpaper and cracked ceiling panels. At the end of the corridor stood a long row of guest rooms, their doors half open. As he approached them, he noticed something strange. The air in the hallway felt colder. Old buildings often have uneven temperatures, especially ones that have been abandoned for decades. But this cold felt different. It was concentrated in a narrow stretch of the corridor, almost like stepping into a pocket of chilled air. He paused for a moment, shining his light into the nearest room. Nothing unusual appeared inside. But when he stepped back into the hallway, he heard something faint behind him. 3 soft knocks, not loud, not aggressive, just 3 gentle taps against wood. He turned around immediately. The hallway behind him was empty. The sound had come from one of the closed doors further down the corridor. He walked toward it slowly, expecting to find a loose panel or some structural movement causing the noise. When he opened the door, the room inside looked exactly like the others, dusty, silent, untouched. No loose boards, no windows open, no reason for the knocking. Moments like this rarely appear in official renovation reports, but they travel quietly through conversations between workers and local residents. Over time, the Baker Hotel developed a reputation that spread far beyond mineral wells. Paranormal researchers from different parts of the United States began requesting access to study the building. Some arrived carrying cameras, audio recorders, and electromagnetic sensors hoping to capture evidence of unexplained activity. Most nights produced nothing unusual, but occasionally, investigators reported recordings that raised interesting questions. One group claimed their audio equipment captured what sounded like faint footsteps pacing slowly across a room above them. Another team reported hearing a woman's voice whisper, something they could not fully understand. Skeptics argue that recordings like these are easily misinterpreted. Old structures produce complex acoustic effects, and the human brain often fills in patterns when listening to random noise. And that explanation may very well be correct. Yet the stories continued, not just from investigators hoping to prove something mysterious, but from ordinary people who had no reason to exaggerate their experiences. A local resident who once worked security around the property during the early 2000s told a story that many in the town still repeat. His job involved patrolling the grounds at night to prevent trespassers from entering the dangerous sections of the building. One evening around midnight, he noticed a light moving slowly across the upper floor windows. At first he assumed someone had broken inside with a flashlight. He radioed his partner and moved closer to the building to investigate. From the ground outside, he watched the beam of light move across one window, then another. It looked exactly like someone walking through the hallway inside. But when they entered the building minutes later, every floor they checked was empty. The windows where the light had appeared showed no signs of anyone passing through. Even stranger, none of the security cameras recorded any movement entering or leaving the building. Experiences like these gradually turned the Baker Hotel into one of Texas' most talked about historic mysteries. But for many people, the most powerful part of the story is not the unexplained events. It is the building's emotional history. During its early decades, the hotel welcomed thousands of guests who believed the mineral waters of mineral wells could improve their health. Many arrived hopeful. Some stayed for weeks while receiving treatments in the underground spa. Families gathered there to celebrate important moments in their lives. Musicians performed in the ballroom while couples danced beneath glittering chandeliers. For years, the Baker Hotel represented prosperity and optimism. Then, slowly, those bright years faded. Travel habits changed. Highways redirected tourists toward larger cities. New resorts appeared in other parts of the country. By the early 1960s, maintaining such a massive structure had become too expensive. When the hotel finally closed its doors in 1963, it marked the end of an era not only for the building, but for the entire town. Many residents remembered the day vividly. Lights that had once illuminated the 14-story tower went dark. The lobby fell silent. Elevators stopped running. The building that had once symbolized the future of mineral wells became an empty landmark towering over quiet streets. Perhaps that dramatic shift from life to silence is part of what gives the Baker Hotel its mysterious reputation. Places that hold intense memories often feel different after they are abandoned. The laughter and music that once filled the rooms do not simply disappear. They become stories. Stories told by people who remember what the place used to be. Stories passed down through families who lived nearby. Stories that slowly blend history with imagination. Today, restoration efforts continue with the goal of reopening the Baker Hotel as a luxury destination once again. Architects and historians are working carefully to preserve the building's original design while strengthening its structure for modern use. If the project succeeds, Visitors will soon be able to walk through the grand lobby just as guests did nearly a century ago. They will ride the elevators, explore the restored ballroom, and look out from the upper floors across the quiet town of Mineral Wells. Most will see the Baker Hotel as a beautiful piece of Texas history brought back to life. But perhaps a few will feel something else when the building grows quiet late at night. Perhaps they will pause in a hallway and listen carefully, not because they expect to hear anything unusual, but because the stories surrounding the Baker Hotel have a strange way of staying in people's minds. And when someone stands alone in a place where thousands of lives once crossed paths, it becomes difficult not to wonder about the past that still lingers there. After all, buildings do not forget easily. Every voice that echoed through their rooms, every secret whispered behind closed doors, every joyful celebration, and every quiet moment of loneliness becomes part of the walls themselves. And in a place like the Baker Hotel, where nearly a century of human history lives within 14 silent floors, the past may never truly disappear. It simply waits, quietly, patiently, until someone walks the hallway again and wonders who might have walked there long before them. By the time the legends surrounding the Baker Hotel had spread across the country, the building had already spent decades standing quietly above the town like a memory that refused to fade. Generations in Mineral Wells had grown up looking at the tall structure on the hill, hearing stories from parents and grandparents about what it once was. For the older residents, the Baker Hotel was not a haunted place. It was a place of life. Some remembered the days when long lines of cars arrived carrying visitors from across Texas. Others remembered the music drifting from the ballroom during weekend dances. There were stories of famous performers passing through town, wealthy families arriving for extended stays, and travelers who came hoping the mineral waters would restore their health. During those early years, the hotel felt almost magical to the people of Mineral Wells. Standing 14 stories tall, it dominated the skyline in a way few buildings did at the time. When the lights shone from every window at night, the entire structure seemed alive. But even in those lively decades, there were moments that felt unusual. One former employee who worked as a housekeeper in the early 1950s once described an experience she never fully explained. She had been cleaning rooms along one of the upper floors during a quiet afternoon when most guests were downstairs attending a luncheon event. As she moved her cart down the hallway, she noticed one of the guest room doors slowly opening. At first she assumed someone inside had pulled it open, but the room had been empty earlier that morning. She stepped closer and gently pushed the door wider. Inside, the curtains were moving slightly even though the windows were closed. The air inside the room felt strangely cool compared to the hallway outside. What unsettled her most was the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air. It was strong enough to notice immediately, yet the room had not been occupied for days. She finished cleaning the room quickly and moved on to the next one, telling herself there had to be a simple explanation. Still, she remembered that moment for the rest of her life. Stories like this rarely appeared in newspapers or official records. They were the kinds of experiences people shared quietly with friends or family members years later. And over time, those small stories accumulated. By the time the hotel closed in 1963, the building had already gathered decades of memories. When the doors finally shut for the last time, the silence that followed seemed almost unnatural. People who lived nearby sometimes described how strange it felt to see the massive building standing dark at night. For more than 30 years, it had been filled with life. Now, the windows reflected nothing but the moonlight. In the years that followed, the Baker Hotel slowly transformed into something different in the public imagination. It became a symbol of the past, but it also became a place of mystery. Visitors who entered the building during its abandoned years often described the same sensation shortly after stepping inside. The air felt still, not stale or unpleasant, just unusually still, as though the building had been waiting quietly for someone to return. Many explorers reported hearing their own footsteps echo through the corridors far louder than expected. Others said the hallways seemed longer once the lights disappeared behind them. In places where every floor looked nearly identical, it became surprisingly easy to lose track of direction. One photographer who documented abandoned buildings across Texas once spent an afternoon exploring the Baker Hotel. He had visited dozens of old structures and rarely felt uneasy in them. But inside this hotel, he noticed something unusual. Every time he reached the end of a hallway, he felt as though someone might be standing just out of sight around the corner. It was not fear exactly, just a persistent feeling of being observed. Later, he admitted that he never actually saw anything strange during his visit, but the sensation remained strong enough that he left earlier than planned. Psychologists often explain experiences like this by pointing out how the human mind reacts to unfamiliar environments. When we enter places that once held human activity but are now empty, our brains instinctively search for signs of other people. In silence, that instinct becomes even stronger. A distant creak might sound like movement. A shifting shadow might resemble a person standing still. Our minds try to fill in the missing details. And perhaps that explains every strange moment reported inside the Baker Hotel. Yet the stories continue to fascinate people. Because the building itself seems almost designed for mystery. Its long hallways stretch farther than most visitors expect. Its staircases twist upward through floor after floor of quiet rooms. Its underground spa corridors form a maze beneath the structure where sounds echo in unusual ways. Standing alone inside such a place, it becomes easy to imagine footsteps where none exist. But even with those explanations, certain stories remain difficult to dismiss entirely. One local police officer who responded to a trespassing call at the property many years ago described a moment he never shared publicly until long after the incident. After entering the building with another officer, they searched the lower floors expecting to find teenagers exploring the abandoned hotel. Instead, they discovered the entire building empty. As they prepared to leave, the officer heard something above them, a slow creak, then another. It sounded exactly like someone walking across the floor above their heads. They waited quietly for several seconds. The footsteps continued. They rushed upstairs expecting to find someone running away, but the floor was completely empty. No open windows, no stairwell doors moving, no signs that anyone had been there. The officer later said he did not believe in ghosts, but he never found a good explanation for what they heard that night. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of the Baker Hotel's story is that it never provides clear answers. Every strange event can be explained in several different ways. A sound might come from shifting wood beams. A shadow might appear because of distant headlights passing outside. A voice on a recording might simply be background noise interpreted by curious listeners. Yet when so many stories accumulate over decades, the mystery begins to feel larger than any single explanation. That is why the Baker Hotel continues to capture people's imagination even today. Not because it is proven to be haunted, but because it sits in that fascinating space between history and legend. Soon, if restoration efforts succeed, the building will return to life once again. Guests will walk through the lobby where travelers once arrived nearly a century ago. Music may once again echo through the ballroom. The elevators will carry visitors up to rooms that have remained silent for decades. And perhaps when those guests fall asleep late at night, they will never think about the stories that once surrounded the building. But some might. Because places with long histories have a way of reminding us that the past never truly disappears. It remains in the walls, in the floors, in the quiet spaces between footsteps. And in a place like the Baker Hotel, where generations of people once passed through its doors, that history feels almost close enough to touch. The building stands today not just as a hotel waiting to reopen, but as a silent witness to everything that has happened within it. Every celebration, every secret, every quiet moment that no one else ever noticed. And somewhere within those 14 silent floors, the echoes of those moments may still be waiting for someone to listen carefully enough to hear them. Long before people began calling the Baker Hotel one of the most mysterious buildings in Texas, it had already become deeply connected to the identity of the town itself. Mineral wells had grown rapidly in the early 20th century because of its mineral springs. People believed the water rising from deep underground possessed healing properties, and visitors arrived from across the country, hoping the springs could ease their illnesses or restore their strength. The Baker Hotel was built to welcome those travelers. When it opened in 1929, the towering structure was more than just a hotel. It represented ambition, wealth, and confidence in the future of the town. With 14 stories, elegant ballrooms, luxurious suites, and the famous spa connected directly to the mineral water source, the building immediately became one of the most impressive destinations in Texas. Guests arrived by train carrying suitcases and expectations. Some stayed for days, others stayed for weeks. Every morning, the hallways filled with quiet conversations as visitors walked toward the spa treatments below the building. Doctors working with the hotel believed the mineral water could help treat arthritis, fatigue, and other health conditions. Whether those treatments truly worked or not, the belief in them brought thousands of people to mineral wells. And for many years, the Baker Hotel thrived. But prosperity rarely lasts forever. As the decades passed, the world outside mineral wells began to change. Travel became easier, but it also became more competitive. New destinations appeared across the country offering modern resorts, beaches, and entertainment that drew tourists away from smaller towns. Slowly, the steady stream of visitors began to decline. By the late 1950s, the once busy hotel felt different. It was still open, still elegant, but the energy that once filled every room had started fading. Fewer guests walked the halls. Fewer celebrations filled the ballroom. Employees who had worked there for years began noticing how quiet certain floors had become. One longtime bellhop later described how strange it felt to ride the elevator to upper floors that had once been full of activity. Sometimes he would step into a hallway and see every door closed, every room empty, with only the distant hum of the elevator cables breaking the silence. It was during those quieter years that more unusual stories began appearing among staff members. A night desk clerk once described hearing the elevator arrive on the lobby floor late at night when no guests were expected. The elevator doors opened slowly, exactly as they always did. But no one stepped out. The clerk assumed someone had pressed the call button on an upper floor and then changed their mind. Still, when he checked the elevator control panel, no floor lights were active. The elevator had simply come down on its own. Moments like that might have passed unnoticed during the busy years of the hotel. But in a building growing quieter each month, they became harder to ignore. Eventually, the inevitable happened. In 1963, the Baker Hotel closed its doors. For the employees who had spent years working inside the building, the closing day felt almost unreal. Furniture was removed, equipment shut down, and the final guests checked out. When the lights were turned off for the last time, the building fell into a silence it had never known before. At first, many people believed the closure would only be temporary. They assumed new owners would eventually restore the hotel and bring visitors back to mineral wells. But years passed, then decades. The empty structure slowly began to deteriorate. Paint peeled from the walls, windows cracked. Rainwater sometimes found its way through damaged sections of the roof. Nature began quietly reclaiming parts of the building. Yet despite its declining condition, the Baker Hotel remained strangely captivating. People driving through town could see the tall structure rising above the trees, still proud even in abandonment. Its presence created a constant reminder of what the town once had been. And naturally, curiosity followed. Explorers, photographers, and curious travelers occasionally entered the property to see the famous building for themselves. Some left simply impressed by its size and architecture. Others left with stories. One explorer who entered the building during the late 1990s described walking through a long corridor on the 10th floor just before sunset. The fading light coming through the windows created long shadows across the floor. As he reached the end of the hallway, he thought he heard someone speaking softly behind him. He turned quickly. No one was there. The sound had been so clear that he initially believed another explorer must have entered the building without him noticing. But after searching several floors, he discovered he was alone. Another visitor claimed that while standing inside one of the old guest rooms, he heard a faint tapping sound coming from the wall behind the bed frame. 3 taps, then silence. A few seconds later, 3 more taps. He knocked on the wall in response, half joking, half curious. Nothing answered back. Moments later, the tapping stopped entirely. Perhaps the most intriguing part of these stories is how ordinary they seem. No dramatic apparitions, no terrifying encounters, just small moments of uncertainty, a sound where no one should be, a movement that cannot be easily explained, a feeling of quiet observation in an otherwise empty place. And over time, those small moments became part of the Baker Hotel legend. Today, historians and architects working to restore the building focus mainly on its historical significance. They study old blueprints, photographs, and construction techniques to return the structure as closely as possible to its original design. For them, the building is not a haunted place. It is an architectural treasure. But even some of those professionals admit that walking alone through the empty halls late at night can feel strangely powerful. Not frightening, just heavy with history. Because buildings like the Baker Hotel do something unusual to the human mind. They remind us how temporary our lives are compared to the structures we build. Generations come and go while the walls remain standing. Thousands of voices echo through the same rooms across decades, and long after those voices are gone, the rooms remain, waiting, listening, holding the quiet memories of everyone who ever passed through them. That is the true mystery of the Baker Hotel. Not whether it is haunted, but how a building that once held so much life can stand so still, yet still feel so full of stories. Stories that refuse to disappear, no matter how many years pass. And perhaps, when the hotel finally opens its doors again, those stories will quietly begin again as well. As restoration efforts continue, the Baker Hotel slowly transitions from a relic of the past to a promise of the future. But the building carries with it every shadow, echo, and memory from nearly a century of history. Visitors who return once it opens may notice the grand lobby, the polished floors, and the restored chandeliers. They may marvel at the elegance that once drew guests from across the country, the lavish suites, and the spa that made mineral wells famous. Yet for those who linger, for those who step carefully down long hallways or pause outside a closed door, the hotel offers more than just architectural beauty. It offers the subtle weight of decades of human life. Even in its restored state, it seems impossible to escape the sensation that the building has absorbed the energy of all who lived, worked, and visited there. Perhaps it is the footsteps that still echo faintly in the hallways at night, or the faint music that drifts down from a long-abandoned ballroom. Perhaps it is simply the quiet, heavy air that makes the visitor pause and notice every small sound, every shadow moving slightly in their peripheral vision. The hotel feels alive, not in the sense of activity or occupancy, but alive in memory, alive in story. Locals continue to pass on tales, ensuring the legend of the Baker Hotel persists. Teenagers tell each other to dare to explore it, even now, though the building is safer and partially secured. Paranormal enthusiasts share recordings, photographs, and personal accounts online, debating what is real and what can be explained away. Each story, each recording, each whisper of experience adds another layer to the complex identity of the hotel. Over time, the boundary between legend and reality becomes blurred, and that is exactly what keeps people coming back. Perhaps the most fascinating stories are the unconfirmed ones, the incidents that no camera can fully capture, the sounds that appear on recordings for only a few seconds, or the sensations that leave witnesses uneasy long after they leave. One historian reported that on a particular rainy evening, the lights flickered momentarily in the ballroom, and a faint scent of perfume lingered, even though the room had been empty for decades. He insisted there was no logical explanation, yet he could not claim it was supernatural. These stories invite interpretation, sparking imagination and curiosity. They fuel the mystery. The hotel, for all its elegance and decay, teaches something profound about human experience. The places we build are never truly empty. They contain traces of our presence long after we are gone, etched into the walls, the floors, and even the air. At the Baker Hotel, these traces are especially potent. Generations of guests, employees, musicians, and visitors have all left something intangible behind, a collective memory that seems to inhabit the building. And when the wind moves just right, when the lights flicker, or when a floorboard creaks unexpectedly, those memories can feel almost tangible. Walking through the Baker Hotel is like stepping into a space where time layers itself upon itself. Moments from the past seem to brush against the present. Laughter echoes faintly through the halls where it hasn't been heard for decades. Soft steps follow down corridors where no one is present. Shadows stretch and shift, hinting at the lives that once animated the space. These are not horror stories meant to terrify, nor ghost stories seeking proof of spirits. They are reminders of the depth of human experience, the cumulative presence of people who once believed in the promise of healing waters, the excitement of grand events, or simply the comfort of a temporary home far from their own towns. By the time night falls over Mineral Wells, the Baker Hotel stands illuminated against the dark sky, a sentinel over the town that witnessed its rise and fall. From the street below, the building's windows catch the moonlight, creating patterns that hint at movement within. Visitors entering its halls may walk the same paths once trodden by countless others. They may feel eyes watching them, though they are alone. They may hear whispers in the quiet, or the soft tap of footsteps that never seem to reveal their source. In those moments, it becomes clear that the Baker Hotel is not haunted in the traditional sense. Its power lies in memory, in history, and in the lingering weight of human presence. And perhaps that is the lasting allure of the Baker Hotel. It is a place where past and present coexist, where stories do not simply end when the doors close, where each visitor adds a new layer to an ever-growing narrative. Those who enter may never fully explain what they feel, what they hear, or what they see, but they leave carrying a fragment of the hotel's story with them. And that story, like the building itself, endures. Even decades from now, when restoration and modernization efforts have long transformed the hotel into a functioning luxury destination, the memory of its quiet, mysterious years will remain. Visitors may enjoy the elegance, the amenities, and the history, yet beneath the polished floors and restored walls, the Baker Hotel will continue to hold the echoes of a bygone era. It will hold the laughter, the conversations, the music, the whispered secrets, and the strange moments that made it unique. In every shadowed corner, in every silent hallway, there is a story waiting to be felt, remembered, and retold. The Baker Hotel, in the end, is more than a building. It is a repository of human experience, a silent witness to nearly a century of life, memory, and mystery. And while some may enter expecting ghosts or supernatural activity, the true haunting is the presence of the past itself, a past that has refused to disappear, lingering quietly in the spaces between walls, floors, and ceilings. Anyone who spends time within its halls will sense it, whether they can explain it or not, and perhaps that is the most compelling story of all, that even in silence, the Baker Hotel speaks. It stands as a reminder that some places, built by human hands and filled with human lives, never truly let go of the people who passed through them. They wait, patient and silent, for anyone willing to listen closely enough to hear the echoes of the past. Even as the Baker Hotel slowly returned to life under the hands of restoration teams, the building seemed to resist being entirely tamed. Workers reported that certain areas felt colder than the rest, despite heating and ventilation being temporarily operational. Lights flickered in predictable patterns in some parts of the building, and in other areas, shadows seemed to move in ways that defied the sun's position or artificial illumination. Some dismissed these occurrences as quirks of old architecture, while others whispered that the building itself retained memories of the people who once filled it with energy. One of the most curious incidents involved a pair of architects examining the grand ballroom late one evening. The floor was polished and reflective, the chandeliers gleaming as if to reclaim the glory of the past. Yet, as the two men walked across the expanse, they noticed faint footprints appearing on the floorboards ahead of them, footprints that could not have come from anyone else in the room. The marks would fade within minutes, leaving no trace. They retraced their steps and found no evidence of dust or material that could create such patterns. Even after years in the field, both men described feeling a peculiar weight in the air, a sensation of being observed not by someone living, but by the countless presences embedded in the hotel. Stories like this kept curiosity alive. Paranormal enthusiasts returned, eager to document the inexplicable. One group brought infrared cameras and audio recorders into the basement corridors that had once connected directly to the mineral spring treatments. The recordings captured faint breathing sounds and whispers that seemed to originate from nowhere. When analyzed, the sounds did not correspond to any known source of interference or background noise. Some dismissed the recordings entirely. Skeptics argued that old buildings naturally create acoustic anomalies. Yet, the effect on those who experienced it firsthand was undeniable. Many reported feeling a rising tension in the air, a pull that made it difficult to leave the corridor quickly. Perhaps the most famous mystery involved a hotel room on the 11th floor, which had remained largely untouched for decades. Visitors reported that when they stayed inside that room, even briefly, they felt as if someone was watching them. Belongings left in plain sight would sometimes move slightly, as though nudged by an unseen hand. Light switches would flicker on and off, and doors that had been closed carefully would reopen without explanation. No camera, no security system, nor scientific test provided a definitive answer. All that remained were stories, layered atop one another over decades, forming a narrative of intrigue and unease. Meanwhile, locals continued to feed the legend of the Baker Hotel. Many families told children stories of the strange occurrences in the grand building on the hill. Some of these tales were cautionary, warning of the hotel's quiet power and the mysteries it contained. Others were told as bedtime stories designed to thrill and excite, describing the distant echo of piano music, the soft laughter of long-gone guests, or the shadows that moved with lives of their own. Over time, even the skeptics began to admit the hotel held a certain magnetic quality, drawing people toward it with curiosity and wonder. But the Baker Hotel was never only about unexplained phenomena. At its core, it remained a testament to human ambition and the ephemeral nature of prosperity. The mineral springs that had made mineral wells famous continued to flow underground, though fewer and fewer visitors sought their healing properties. The hotel's architectural grandeur symbolized an era in which elegance and leisure were paramount. Yet even the finest designs could not escape the passage of time. The building stood as both a triumph and a reminder of impermanence, of how lives, no matter how vibrant, eventually fade. As the restoration progressed, workers began uncovering hidden spaces and forgotten rooms. Behind false walls and sealed doors, they discovered items left behind decades ago. Dusty letters, broken furniture, old medical instruments from the spa, and even photographs of guests posing proudly for the camera. Each artifact told a story, a fragment of the countless human lives that had intersected within the hotel. For those who found these remnants, the experience was powerful, almost like touching history directly. The hotel, even in its silence, seemed to demand respect and acknowledgement of the lives it had hosted. At night, when the restoration lights were turned off, the Baker Hotel seemed to regain a presence that was almost tangible. Those working late often described hearing whispers, footsteps, or the faint strains of music drifting through corridors. Many attributed these experiences to imagination or fatigue. Others were not so sure. They described a sensation of being observed, a quiet insistence that the building remembered every life that had passed through it. Whether real or imagined, the effect was undeniable. The hotel had become more than a structure. It was a living repository of memory. Perhaps the most chilling element of the Baker Hotel story is its ability to maintain mystery even in plain view. Visitors may stand in the restored lobby, marveling at the chandeliers, the polished floors, and the ornate woodwork, yet feel an inexplicable unease, a quiet tension in the air. It is not fear of a tangible threat. Rather, it is the profound awareness that a place can hold onto its past, its joys, its sorrows, its secrets, and present them quietly to anyone willing to notice. Stories from the past continue to influence modern visitors. A local historian recalls interviewing a former employee who had worked in the hotel during its heyday. She described the grandeur of the guest suites, the laughter that filled the dining hall, and the smell of freshly polished floors. Yet she also shared memories of odd occurrences. Objects moved without explanation, the faint echo of voices in empty rooms, and the sense that the hotel itself was paying attention to those who walked its halls. Her memories, combined with decades of reports from curious visitors, create a tapestry of narrative that continues to evolve. The Baker Hotel's legend is one that bridges the gap between history and imagination. It reminds us that even when a building is silent, it carries within it the essence of all who have passed through. Each story, each unexplained sound, and each shadow contributes to an ongoing narrative that blends fact and folklore. Visitors and historians alike must navigate that line carefully, appreciating both the historical significance and the subtle mysteries that linger in the halls. Ultimately, the Baker Hotel stands as a symbol of time's persistence. It teaches us that human ambition, memory, and experience leave marks that endure long after life itself has moved on. As visitors walk through its restored corridors, pause in its grand ballrooms, or linger in rooms untouched for decades, they encounter a building that is much more than the sum of its floors and walls. They encounter a living memory, a silent witness, and a place where the echoes of the past remain present, quietly, insistently, hauntingly. And so, the story of the Baker Hotel continues, not because it has revealed all of its secrets, but because it never truly can. Each visitor adds a new chapter, each whisper and creak becomes part of its narrative, and each shadowed hallway invites curiosity and reflection. The building waits patiently, holding the weight of a century of human life, ready to share its mysteries with anyone willing to listen closely enough. Because some places built with care and filled with countless lives never truly forget. They endure, they observe, and they quietly, undeniably haunt the imagination.